Brandon, thanks so much for being with me on this Slice of Finance podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, Jared.
Since it's your first time ever being on the show, would love if you could just quickly give us a little background on yourself and then give us a quick company overview, and then we'll go into our chat today.
Yeah, of course. So a little bit about me. You can probably tell from the accent that I didn't grow up in the US. I was actually born in South Africa, moved to the States just over 20 years ago, and I've been in various software and technology businesses throughout my career, and most recently at TreviPay for the last 11 years. So, kind of quick background on the business. The business is really all about helping merchants, B2B merchants, offer trade credits to their best customers. So as you probably know, if you are selling to businesses, then in general, businesses are looking for some form of payment terms, typically 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And that results in an order to cash process that merchants have to manage and administrate. And that can be burdensome and be painful, and particularly if you're in multiple countries, can be hard to do. So the customers we work with, we really allow them to offer that to their clients without having to do all of the heavy lifting and work themselves.
Now, how would you say, how do purchase controls help businesses improve operational efficiency and, reduce payment delays and boost compliance?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, one of the real challenges in B2B, which is really different from B2C, is you have many different stakeholders in a B2B transaction. And obviously, one of the key stakeholders is on the buy side is whoever holds the budget. And so if you think about what purchase controls are really all about, they're really about allowing the buyers to establish and set up all of the limits and constraints around how they want the purchasing to happen. And that can be as simple as, here's my budget for the year on a certain set of line items that I'm allowed to buy. It could be daily budgets. It could be budgets by SKU type. It could be budgets based upon, monthly numbers. And so that really allows you as a merchant to sort of help the buyer administrate their procurement processes. So the net of all of this is that if you are able to help facilitate the way the buyer works, then generally they spend more money with you. You become a supplier who's easier to do business with. You help them with their internal compliance, and ultimately you get a bigger share of their wallet.
Can we also talk a little bit about, um, you know, primarily we always focus on all things B2B. What are some of the specific pain points in B2B purchasing that you believe your solutions address?
Yeah, again, great question. So I think there's several things. One of them is the one that we just touched on, which is something like purchase controls. I think the other thing that really stands out is that if you're operating in many different geographies, then the requirements for what constitutes a legal invoice and what constitutes a compliant invoice is particularly complicated too, and it's different by country. Just as simple as if you're dealing with Canadian buyers, for example, and you're a US business, you have to produce a VAT compliant invoice in Canada. And that might not be something that you're used to doing or actually want to do. And take that problem and amplify it, in a place like Europe, where you're basically dealing with 20 different jurisdictions that all have different rules around what a compliant invoice looks like. There's also a fairly substantial data challenge that exists. So if you think about it, for an invoice to be approved inside of a buyer, there needs to be a lot of information on the invoice that helps accounts payable put it in the right place or send it through the right approval chain. And so a lot of what we're all about is making sure that that data is on the invoice in the first place and that it's accurate, and that in the case of compliance, that it's compliant. And if you do all of those things, if you have the right data on an invoice, you have a compliant invoice, then your probability of getting it through the payment people on the other end is going to be that much higher, which ultimately means you get paid on time.
Can we talk about the importance of, everyone wants seamless, right?
Yeah.
Is it seamless? Is it seamless? So let's talk about the importance of offering a seamless, frictionless purchasing experience and how that impacts building long-term buyer loyalty.
Yeah, I think that's actually, one of the most important topics because, at the end of the day, customers have choice and they, if you assume all things being equal, you have a competitive product, you have a competitive price, then what it ultimately comes down to is who can I interact with and who can I deal with that makes my life easier. And so we generally refer to that as experience loyalty versus brand loyalty. Historically, there's been brand loyalty. You go to the same brands and you buy from the same brands. And if you think about what's happened in our consumer lives, for the most part, that's been displaced by experience loyalty. You go somewhere where it's easier to do business, where you know that things are, in the case of someone like Amazon, it's just going to get delivered to your door. The stuff's just going to show up. And so that is equally true in the B2B context. And so everything that we're all about with our merchants is helping them bridge the gap so that they can become the supplier of choice to their customers. And that's really all about making sure that those buyers are getting what they need. You're helping them with things like purchase controls, the compliant invoicing, all the right data on the invoice. You have a seamless onboarding process. So when you bring a new customer on board, it's easy and not a painful process. You have adequate credit lines, all of these sorts of things that really facilitate the flow of commerce.
Now, Brandon, outside of automation, right? What are some of the other trends you're seeing in B2B payments today?
I think the trend that we see most often is that businesses are grappling with how to really internationalize their offering. And I think this has obviously been driven by the rise of e-commerce. And so as more and more businesses are acquiring customers and interacting with customers online, so I think we see this increasing trend of those customers could be anywhere. So you might start out operating in one jurisdiction and almost by accident acquire customers that are in other jurisdictions. And then you're faced with all of the challenges that might ultimately come from that, which is if your customers say to you, you know what, I love buying your products, but I'm based in Germany and you're based in the US, and unless you can give me an invoice in euros that's in German, like I'm going to have to find another supplier. Like, how do you deal with that? And so I think obviously the e-commerce trend, the trends around doing more things online, whether it's customer acquisition or sales, is driving an internationalization of most businesses. And this often happens when the businesses are not necessarily well prepared or well equipped for dealing with what that looks like.
What can you share with us today? I know there's some things you can share, there's some you can't, right? When it comes to what's next
Yeah.
for the company, but what else is on the horizon that you can tell us here today?
I think what we're most excited about is if you generally think about B2B tends to lag the consumer world by somewhere between 5 and 15 years, depending on what problem you're solving. And I think in the space that we're in, we're probably closer to the 15 years than to the 5. And so a lot of technology has really had to be developed to put you in a position where you can offer that consumer-like experience for business customers. And we feel like for the first time, we've actually got enough of that there's enough momentum, there's enough impetus behind this now, there's enough capability that this is going to become more of a mainstream thing for many clients. And so we've gone from a world where we were, having a handful of new networks that we were onboarding per year to now having that number be, in the tens of new networks. And as a result, tens of thousands of new customers that are being onboarded. So for us, what we're most excited about is that this is becoming really a solution for the early majority, for people who are not necessarily early adopters, but people who are more of the mainstream types of clients. And that obviously bodes really well for our industry overall and ultimately for our customers, because there's going to be a lot more investment in this category of offerings.
If you had to pick one thing that you wish people knew about TreviPay, but you think they might not know, what would that thing be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the one thing about us is a lot of what we do is white labeled. And so we sit behind some of the world's biggest brands, but nobody knows. So my wish is actually really simple, that they just know who TreviPay is. Because so often we're powering these very large clients and powering their programs, and yet it's not known because we're actually in the background doing it on behalf of our customers. So I think my main message is, if you're offering trade credit to your customers, if you're finding that it's difficult to scale, or you internationalizing the business, or you have certain categories of customer that you're going after that are hard to service, then know that there's a solution out there, that there's a company in TreviPay that can help you scale that element of your business, help you go faster, ultimately help you sell more.
Last question for you, Brandon. This is a personal question before we wrap up here. If you had to name a very, it doesn't have to be, I don't like asking like, what's the best advice you've ever received because it's hard to like think, but what is some very solid piece of advice you've received in your career that still sticks with you today?
Yeah, I think I would have to come back to, one of the biggest challenges for every business is really identifying what it is that you're best at. What it is that makes you you and makes and helps you differentiate from your customers. And it took us a while in our business to really sort of pick that and say, okay, this is the thing. And, I'll share it with you. Like, we believe that trust is our superpower. And why do I say that? Well, when we go to a merchant and we say to them, we would like you to work with us and we will sit in between you and your best customers, there's a tremendously high level of trust that you have to actually get that commitment from a customer. And so I think the best advice I got was find that one thing that is really defining for your business, and then double down and triple down on making it real, and continue to have that as sort of a north star for everything that you do.
I love it. Brandon, hope to talk again in the near future. Really enjoyed chatting with you here today. Thanks for sharing some more about TreviPay and then also some nice advice at the end that you've received. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Jared.